Hey there, this is Michelle Jaarah again. This portion is going to be the post-activity reflection to my observation video. So in observing Callie's biology class, I was able to observe many instructional strategies that reached various learners. I found cooperative learning to be the most dominant instructional strategy. Works out real nicely in a lab classroom, especially when students are sitting in a lab group already. In fact, Callie did mention during our pre-conference that she strategically grouped students based on ability level, and she used the data from the previous unit test to do that. So kids are able to collaborate specifically with their group members that are strategically made. The fact that students openly communicated and asked questions during the class was evidence of a safe and comfortable learning environment for the students. Callie had the objectives set, and she communicated those objectives both at the top of the handouts they received, and also those objectives are put at the beginning of each online assessment. There was direct instruction, and during her direct instruction, she modeled note taking for students. She had that expectation of them, but she also modeled it for the students that might struggle. She kept students engaged by randomly calling on them to read aloud. And she kept it fun by offering the option to read in a funny voice or a funny accent if they wanted to. She gave tips and tricks for vocabulary. So for example, when she was teaching the male part of the flower, she said, okay, like the male part of the flower is called the stamen, and you can remember that because it has men in the word, stay men. So that works for all students, but especially for like your ELL learners, being able to make connections like that and make the vocabulary sticky or stick, in your head. Let's see. She was able to reinforce effort, provide recognition, and check for understanding when she walked around during the lab to monitor the different groups. I really appreciated the way she handled off-task behavior because even if the student asked like a real off-topic question, she always managed to find a way to relate it back to her content, whether it was the content she was covering that day, or if it was like something from a previous unit. It was also interesting to hear how the students were making connections between their own experiences or prior knowledge and the class content. For example, when Callie was describing the flower parts, and she explained how some of those parts are considered to be modified. I overheard a student telling another student about a flower he had seen in the Virgin Islands. Another example occurred when an ELL student asked if they were emasculating the flower. Which turned into a whole conversation of, okay, well, no, that's not exactly what's happening. And she's like, okay, well, what are you getting at? Like, let's think of the term emasculate. All right, well, this is the definition and how it applies to animals. All right. And if that's the definition and how it applies to animals, can we really use that in context when talking about the plant? So anyway, she was able to address the question that had the potential to take the class off task, and she created a fun and constructive learning opportunity with that. All right, so that's what I observed in Callie. Let's talk about a little bit about my experience with this activity. And kind of my takeaways from the experience of putting myself in the role of an administrator, observing a classroom teacher. I had a pre-conference, and I followed up with the class observation, and I feel like the whole process went rather smoothly. However, I also realized that the activity put me slightly out of my comfort zone. It's really kind of difficult to it's a difficult process to observe. First of all, right now it's a colleague. um, Notice the criteria you need to. um, so having a very, very like objective mindset, and then being able to properly reflect on that observation in a critical but constructive way. It's a really, really involved process. um, so, prior to doing another observation, I would like to speak with a few principals on my campus for advice. I want to know and understand the processes they have established for themselves. I want to know what they look for um, during an observation. So, like, for example, what is the first thing they notice when entering the classroom? Next, like, how do they look for certain things? All right, so when they're looking for instructional strategies, like what are the sorts of things they're looking for? When they're looking for differentiation, what are the sort of things they're looking for? And what is the verbiage that they use when communicating what they observe? um, and like how do they word their feedback, that sort of thing. So pretty much like the logistics, and I would really just like to get a better grasp on how other administrators do that, because that's kind of how I process things. I'm like, hey, how do you do this? Hey, how do you do this? And I listen to everybody and kind of pick out what's going to work for me. um, let's see, this activity has made me realize that I currently function as and have the perspective of a classroom teacher still. With additional time, and I think the key thing is going to be consulting with those other campus leaders and then getting more practice myself. With all of that, I can begin to shift my perspective from a classroom teacher to an administrator, and improve that skill of being able to objectively observe a classroom teacher as an administrator.